there's rumors going around that Bitmain may be hijacking their firmware and that they just put out a fix. But that doesn't seem to be entirely true. So what we did was we got Portland Hoddle to come and join us today to do this clip. Let's dive into it. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you had a great weekend. Joining me right now on such short notice, and we really appreciate your time. We've got Portland Hoddle. He is a return guest to Pleb Underground. That's right. He's, if you haven't seen it, he did a weekly episode with us, which I will share either in the comments or at the end of the clip, so that you guys can go check it out. Portland works for Marathon, and you know what? I'll just give a really terrible description, so I'll let Portland explain before we dive into this whole thing that's going on with the empty blocks. Portland, if you could just let people know what it is that you do and how you broke Bitcoin. I mean, how you make things better.
Basically, I'm contracted by Marathon Digital Holdings. My primary function right now is it's technically code review / audit, but I did develop, while I was there, also a product called Slipstream. What Slipstream is basically Bitcoin core template generation controls, aka the way the blocks are built and making sure blocks earn Marathon as much in fees as possible. As a part of that, I have explored pretty in depth the different nuances of like the Stratum protocol, how a pool submits jobs to these miners, how the miners respond to these jobs, how to ensure that Marathon doesn't mine these empty blocks, and kind of the little things around like basically optimizing the block for the highest possible fees. And yeah, part of today's conversation, I'm assuming, is going to be on these blocks, which have been apparently maybe optimized for poor fees because they don't seem to be having anything in them. Yeah. So
yes.
Yeah.
But before we dive into that, because we're going to pull up a Bitcoin Mechanics tweet, obviously, just to give people a quick review in case they don't know. But essentially, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but if this really was an issue of the firmware, I mean, I'm pretty sure Marathon does have some Antminers, right? So would it not be a safe assumption that these empty blocks would be appearing for anybody that's using an Antminer with, the firmware version that is claimed to be specified? I don't know.
No, so there's some interesting nuance to that, because Mechanic is just saying that basically that the Antminers aren't flushing the work out quick enough, right? And so basically they're saying, hey, there's an empty block. Antminer, work on this block as fast as possible with nothing in it, because that's the quickest way to send the data to the Antminer. Because the amount of data, think of it as like this big. It's super small. And if you want to send all the transactions, you have to send about this much data. And it takes a little bit of time for the host to process that new block. And AK, you don't want to be working on stale work. So the theory is, okay, submit the block empty to the new miners as soon as you see a block come in, so that you're not working on an old tip. With that said, that also provides the requirement that you tell these miners to work on an empty block. They also have to get the full block later, ideally, right? Technically, the miner doesn't have to give them a bunch of transactions. They could just forego the transaction revenue, but that wouldn't be part of the game theory, right? That would be a terrible idea. Just mining Coinbase transactions sort of subsidy only, not collecting fees, especially as these fees become more and more. But with that said, what's happening primarily is these pool operators are saying to their hashers, hey, okay, we saw a block. You hashers, all you guys, start mining on this empty block right now. I'm going to give you the transactions later, kind of like a promise, like I'll give you the rest later and you can work on it. And kind of the claim is that, hey, we're telling these miners that we have the transactions, but they're ignoring it, right? So we're telling them to mine the empty block, and they start mining it immediately with all the empty stuff. But then when we submit the actual job, they're just ignoring our stuff, right? That's kind of like, I believe, the claim that's being made. And it's continue.
I'm sorry. I just want to just to dumb it down. So are we saying right now that essentially in this case, right, that there is a promise, there is a promise that there's going to be a block full of transactions, so they do the work in advance, and then in the end it turns out to be an empty block?
Let's say that
because there was a
Oh, you go.
I was just going to say that there was this information about how the full template wasn't provided in advance.
That's what
So
I'm saying. The full
yeah,
template
okay.
is the promise, right? So
Okay,
think
that's it. So
about
the full
this, like,
template's the promise.
let's say you're at like some sort of competition, right? And there's a bunch of a variety of different games. You got like basketball, you got darts, you got uh what like horseback racing, all sorts of stuff, okay?
Hmm.
And each competition has a prize, right? Um you as a miner, if you know somebody's won the basketball competition, you want to figure out the quickest way to get over to horse racing so you can try to win some money there instead, right? Like you don't want to continue to try to shoot hoops
Because you already know.
when somebody's already collected all that money, right?
Yeah.
And so um basically what Antpool is notorious for doing this, and this is how you end up with empty blocks. Like let's say you're at the basketball game, right? And then you find out, oh, Portland Hoddle just kicked my butt. He did the 3-pointer and got the prize money there. You're like, I still need to leave with some money today. I know horseback riding's the next one. What Antpool and everybody else does, they basically say, hey, run to the horses with no gear on and just go out there, go just start trying to race the horses, just start trying to win, and we'll give you the rest of the equipment later to, like, we'll give you the spurs to kick the horse with, we'll give you the helmet in a second, but just get over there and start racing on horses and see if you can at least try to win some money there. And then so
It's an interesting
after
analogy.
yeah, so after enough time, like, okay, so Portland Hoddle also, like, I'm going to compete too, right? And so the way Marathon does it is basically we take the extra time initially for like, remember, this happens in like that, right?
Hmm.
So we take the extra time to process it, and I get geared up to race the horses. I got my spurs, I got my helmet and everything on. So I'm going to make, basically, theoretically, this isn't the perfect analogy. I'll make more money by winning, but not really. So, but with that said, Antpool and those guys, they just put the guy on the horse and just go, next one. No transactions in the block. Just shoot it off. Are we going to win a race? That's it. Just shove it out the door. And then if he doesn't win, and no, like theoretically, sometimes nobody wins in these horse races just for some reason, right? It's not the perfect analogy. But yeah, and then you start it again, and then they're like, okay, second time, hey, we got the stuff here. Let's gear you up, and then you can go out, and then you'll make a little bit more money. And by gear up, I mean this time you're going out there with fees. That's really it. Because somebody already won the previous game, you got to start playing the next one. And Marathon, because of the infrastructure it's vertically stacked, right? So they know the latency between everything, how long these connections, how long each template takes to make, it's all controlled. So we know, okay, within about 0.75 seconds, we have a full template. Let's just not mine empty blocks. So Foundry also notably hasn't mined any empty blocks either. Right? And they're a very large pool with a lot of ant miners. And that's because they don't send out an empty template. They gear up their players to go out for the next game with full fees.
Okay.
This idea of, hey, we're going to send you out and just go play the game with no preparation, and then we'll get you ready on the next kind of round is kind of the way Ocean apparently did it. Antpool is absolutely doing it. Those are the two that I know kind of that have that kind of infrastructure.
I really appreciate you explaining that. We're going to pull up Bitcoin Mechanics tweet very quickly just to provide some context for the next part of this. Okay, so here's the tweet. We're not going to go through the whole thing. We've already done this in the weekly episode, okay, but we are going to put a link to it for people to go through it and if they want to read through it. But what I did was that I just highlighted a specific section over here towards the end, okay, because this is really the crux of the matter, okay. This is kind of where we get into this gray area, okay, essentially where Bitcoin Mechanic, who works for Ocean Mining, claims, right, that the Antminer firmware was built in a way that it would be inefficient and essentially be processing older jobs first, which essentially creates latency. So I'm just going to go into this piece right here. Why would an empty block happen after a few seconds after the pool had already sent an updated job for a full block? And this goes to Portland Hoddle's point, what he was talking about before. And so here, Bitcoin Mechanic goes, because Antminer sucks. What we didn't realize was that they intentionally sucked. And this is kind of the crux of the whole matter, right? So you can send an updated job to an Antminer and watch it continue. And this is the assertion where I do not know enough technically to, you know what I mean, to provide a rebuttal for that. But yeah, so here we go. So you can send an updated job to an Antminer and watch it continue to work on an old job for over 60 seconds in edge cases. This was something we assumed was due to the design of the ASIC itself, and thus just poor engineering on the part of Bitmain. But it turns out we were wrong. It's due to Antminer firmware. We know this because they just released a fix for it. So now, I in the original video, having worked for an access control company for the better part of 2 decades, we had many issues, right, where the firmware was the source of the issue. The field technicians would experience latency in performance, right, and essentially the company itself would never actually say that it was an issue with the firmware, but they would release a fix and magically the issue would disappear. Now, so of course, when I did this original article, and then on Friday night, last Friday night, Portland Hoddle was in a Spaces with me, and essentially we started to discuss this whole aspect of what was going on, and so you claim that it is that they are not doing this, that the firmware is not intentionally hijacked. And I mean, I believe, or at least I'd like to believe, that based on the fact that other major mining pools are also using the same hardware and firmware and are not experiencing the same type of issue. But I do understand, is it possible that the way that ocean mining is the ocean mining implementation is somehow causing this particular issue in the firmware to appear in the form of empty blocks? Is that plausible, or am I just too far off into the weeds?
I don't want to get into Ocean's implementation because I don't know enough about their implementation.
Fair
I
enough,
don't know
fair
what they wrote their Stratum protocol in. I don't know anything about the details. I just know that in essence, miners are very simple machines, okay? They basically take in a command called miner.notify. What that is, that's like a manager telling a worker, hey, you have a job to do. This is the kind of job you're doing today. In the case of Bitcoin, you're telling the miner, this is the block you're working on, and these are the transactions you're going to be processing in this block. There's a second command called miner.submit. This is received from the worker to the manager, right? So the manager's the pool, the worker's the S19 or S21 miner. And when a miner.submit is basically the equivalent of the worker who just got his job saying, hey, boss, look at me. I got my job done. Here's some work. And then they will prove to you with the work that they provide back that basically, after a little bit of calculation you do have to do, you will prove that, okay, this miner actually created a block header with a hash that starts with a certain number of zeros. The thing that's coming into question with this is, first of all, is Antminer deliberately sabotaging their machines to essentially, basically, the miner.notify command goes out. So the manager tells the worker, hey, do this job. And even though the manager says another miner.notify a bit later on, right? So he says, here's my second one with more fees. Again, like I said, gearing up earlier. It's kind of being implied that Antminer or Bitmain is maliciously making it so that even though the manager notified the worker of this new job, the worker's still working on the old job. Like it's unable to flush its memory or take in this new order. I'm not seeing that behavior. And the reason why is I've actually written a protocol or program that literally intercepts these commands from the worker to basically the pool. And it literally logs all these things, all the miner notifies, all the requests to do work, and all the submissions back. And basically the clear time for an Antminer S19 seems to be like worst case 9 seconds. About 7 seconds is kind of like on the long edge, but most jobs clear in 1 to 2 seconds. Easy, done. I'm updated, working on the latest work, the latest miner.notify. The S21, the exact same parameters happen. It's no different than the S19. The thing about this firmware fix was that I haven't noticed any difference on the machines that we have applied this to. So I did the exact same testing. Okay, miner.notify goes out. How long until I stop receiving jobs from this machine that reference that first miner.notify command that went out, right? So basically, how long until after I've submitted the new one do these commands stop coming in for this old job I had sent out earlier, right? And yeah, at the end of the day, I don't quite see how that firmware, like we've always had delays, and most of those seem to be kind of related to network connectivity, not the actual like act of flushing. So yeah, overall, I don't see necessarily how without proof, and like I mean by proof, like a statement from Bitmain beyond optimize firmware, because they release every firmware they come with the note of optimized firmware. All firmwares for the S21 have been listed with the footnote of optimized firmware. Like, okay, what did they do to optimize
But what
it?
does that mean, right?
Yeah, what does it mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. So second is, we have been like Antminer deliberately, or sorry, I'm going to reference Bitmain, deliberately sabotaging some machines and not others for their own pool, I think was mentioned in that post, correct?
Yes, that is correct. That was one of the assertions, that the retail, everything they've sold out into the world has been sabotaged with this slower processing, so to speak, or we'll say I guess the word I'm looking for, efficient, non-efficient processing, right? Because essentially according to the claim is that it's processing older jobs first, or these older templates first, which
Well,
are
it's always going
possibly
yeah, you
essentially
go.
they're irrelevant at this point.
I mean, it's just like they're not processing old, like the templates are processed in sequence. And like I said, like it's a notification, like it's a constant stream of notifications. Work on this, work on this, work on this, work on this. Like it's just, it's working on something that's a little bit older than you would like. You want to be working on the freshest task. Let's get into one point about this I don't quite understand fully.
Okay, so we're just gonna back up because we had a bit of an interruption, and we were talking about the Bitmain miners working on the stale jobs, and more specifically, right, trying to figure out if I guess if their firmware actually is hijacked. I guess that's the last point that we were looking at.
More
Maybe
so like
maybe that's bad wording. Maybe that's bad wording.
Maliciously or unintentionally not updating to the freshest jobs, thus paying the highest amount of fees. And like, so here's some evidence I got. It's like I talked about the program I wrote to basically intercept these packets from the Stratum protocol and see, like, under the worst case, how long does it take for a miner to basically stop working on its previous job and work on a new job. My evidence that I don't think they're being quite as malicious as stated, or even malicious at all, is there's only one command that tells the miner to work on a new job every single time. And it doesn't matter if that job is an updated job or it is just a brand new block. So I'm talking about an updated job. We're working on the same block, but I got new transactions for you to work on, or I got a whole new block. But there is one defining change between that and the actual job that is given out for an update. And let me Google this real quick because I want to make sure I read this term correctly.
No worries.
Oh, okay, there we go. From the bitcoinwiki.it. The thing that notifies the miner of the work is called miner.notify, and that's like a command. And it has this like last little field, a part of it, called, real quick, I want to make sure I read this exactly.
Oh, yeah,
clean jobs. And what that means is, I'm going to read this directly from the wiki. Clean jobs. If true, miners should abort their current work immediately and use the new job, even if it degrades hash rate in the short term. If false, they could still use the current job, but should move to the new one as soon as possible without impacting hash rate. So basically what this implies is that in the situation of a new block and you're trying to notify the miner of the new work, you need to set clean jobs equal to true. You do not want that miner working on old work at all. You want it to immediately stop working on that old work. Like, again, stop the current work immediately. Okay, so that's what happens on all blocks. And this is how I know that Antminers are immediately updating the jobs as they should be. And this is because of the fact that after the previous block came in, it didn't work on that old job for a minute and then mine a stale tip. They were able to actually mine an empty block because that's what they told the miner through the Stratum protocol. Mining.notify, here's your job ID, here's the hash of the block that you need to build on top of, and here's the empty list of transactions. Remember, we're going out with no equipment here. We're just going to go do it live, and we'll give you the stuff later. And then clean jobs equals true. I'm looking at a fork observer created by 0xB10C that shows this. And you can see that as soon as there's a new block, he has a field that turns red when the miners request through this miner.notify to clear the jobs, like clear out everything. We're starting fresh, right? Even if your hash rate goes down a little bit because you have to submit the new jobs to the chips. So that's definitely working just fine. Miners getting notified of these new jobs. The thing that isn't, and I can't reproduce, is the fact that after you freshen up the job, basically, here's your equipment. You can go race the horses as earlier. Again, you'll have a helmet and spurs this time. That, if they use clean job when they do that, should also force that same behavior again with the transactions instantly. That is, and I verified this does happen with 100% certainty. There is like, I go on testnet, I got an S21, I've told it to clean jobs, it works on the brand new template. The only time it'll work on a stale template, including an empty template, is if you leave that clean jobs at false for that update. It will continue, and at its own leisure, when it's done with all the work it's already done, it will say, hey, what do you got for me? Oh, here's the new transactions. So that's what I think very likely potentially could be the problem, is that on the update of the block to freshen the contents up, give it these transactions that were missing from the initial job that it gave the mining equipment, where it said clean jobs equal true, clean out everything, work on the new work. I think that that might be a point that isn't being taken care of, is that when you update the transactions for the first time after the jobs have been submitted now, setting that to true. Again, don't trust verify. There are definitely ways you can check this. And I haven't done the proof of work in that department. I've done the proof of work on my side to validate that that's what happens on testnet specifically with one of these machines. And I can't get, again, like worst case is like 7 seconds before the job is completely cleared out. But that was a pretty significant network delay that was injected by me just as part of testing. The majority of them are like 1 second, you're done, like just completely done. So yeah, it wouldn't make any sense that it would clear the job out and work on the freshest job, which is the brand new block where it submits the empty block, and then it wouldn't do the same exact behavior if they updated the transactions. The only reason it would do it that way is, again, if they didn't clean the jobs. Antminers do 100%. If you set the clean jobs to true, it will stop working on what it's doing and basically use the newest template you sent. It doesn't sit there and linger. The second thing, Ant Pool having this hash rate that they've dedicated and set aside for themselves that doesn't have the bug in it potentially, and then the rest of the world gets the bug. It doesn't make any sense. Ant Pool pays out with FPPS. They're a pool. They pay out to all pool members. They are the largest producer of empty blocks. And if you look at the mining pools producing the empty blocks, they're all these subsidies for these Ant Pool templates as well. So for example, you have Poolin, Brains, Binance have all produced quite a few empty blocks lately. Those are those pools that are using the Ant Pool templates. And you can see this in 0xB10C's fork observer.
So is it that they're templates are just poorly configured? Is that what it is? Or sorry, I'm just trying to dumb it down from the extremely highly technical to the mid-level technical. Like what? Yeah,
dumbing it down all the way. It comes down to a choice by the pool.
To Phil's level.
Phil's so basically it comes down to the way the pool is configured at the end of the day. Okay. That's what's happening. The pools can make two choices.
Because they claim it's not their pool, right? They obviously, Bitcoin Mechanic is claiming that it's not their pool. And my whole thing is this, right? Like, what would be the near-term incentive is just to essentially deflect the blame. I believe that, but
that would be a fantastic reason. And
but ultimately, why else? Like, why would they do this? Like, wouldn't it just mean that, like, I don't see how anybody really has an incentive to mine an empty block unless they are actively trying to be, bad actor on the network.
No, there is a little bit of a reason. Because remember how I said Marathon will take the 1 second penalty where it's kind of working on a stale tip? Yeah. That energy technically could be considered wasted for that 1 second, right? Because of the fact it's working on something it knows is a little bit outdated. By mining the empty block and shooting it off into the miners super fast, you basically get 1 second of hash rate. And if you're lucky enough to find a block during that 1 second, it's going to be empty because you basically told the miner to work on an empty job. At the end of the day, here's why I can't blame anybody but a pool operator for this. They're the ones that submitted the job to mine an empty block. The miner didn't do that on its own will. The miner didn't just go, hey, like I'm just going to start mining on this empty one. And second, like a little bit deeper, is that if you do say clean jobs with these ant miners, they do clean the jobs. They will absolutely start working on the new template. You do temporarily give up a little bit of hash rate while it processes that job and tells the chips, hey, flush your current stuff. And for that instantaneous moment, it has to kind of clear out, but it's not a lot. So like kind of bring it all back. It all comes down to choices made by the pool and the operations they choose. The equipment, yes, could be at fault for a stale job. If they're complaining that, hey, these miners are working on these old jobs for a very long period of time, you might want to consider using your pool implementation and submitting a clean job request to flush it out. It will do it immediately as soon as it gets it. It doesn't hold on to these things. So yeah, that's what it comes down to, I believe. And there's a reason Foundry hasn't mined an empty block. There's a reason that Antpool does mine empty blocks. It's the trade-off of what they want to do. Do they want to basically ensure that they're not going to split or fork or orphan a block because they decide to, during that 1 second, fill in the template? Or do they go with the really quick route, no gear on, go to the horse races, let's just start trying? That's what Antpool decides to do. Marathon and Foundry go with the other approach of just like, hey, we'll submit everything once it's all processed and ready. The amount of time that's there and the hash rate Mara has, that's not a thing at all. Foundry actually has had some blocks that they've mined with full templates that come in slightly later. And we've seen that before. Like they will find a block like 6 seconds after. That's kind of like that empty block. But instead of finding an empty block, they found a full block, but it was on an old template. So for an old block, sorry for not dumbing it down.
No, not at all. You know what? I was, as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking to myself, why does this sound like they're doing some form of degen mining? Like where essentially they're taking more risk in hopes of the reward, whereas Marathon is seemingly taking the more, like the safer approach that is more likely to guarantee a repeatable outcome over and over again.
Well, here's the interesting thing though.
It's interesting.
Like, let's dive into this real quick. Is that it might actually, in terms, okay, let's do it real fast. But in essence, the ethics becomes of this. That technically that 1 second that Marathon uses to fill in that block. And by the way, it's not a whole second. It's like just under sometimes. But with that said, that energy is potentially wasted or considered wasted because of the fact it's working on a job that is technically a little bit stale. And so every 60 blocks or so, that's 1 minute of time that could be considered just potentially wasted, right? In energy, versus if we submit an empty block, you only take a third of a second, maybe a half a second to get it out to the miners, and you waste a little bit less energy. The goal is always to minimize that slippage. But at the end of the day, just the way the pool architecture is, and the fact that as of right now, I don't think I want to be mining empty blocks. So it makes no difference. Marathon hasn't mined an empty block. We also haven't gotten orphaned off for mining a block 1 second after at the same time. So at the end of the day, it's been unimpactful. Marathon Foundry at their scale has seen a little bit of slippage because of the fact that they have found full blocks on old chain tips because they didn't submit the empty tip, right? They didn't go, hey, just work on the newest thing. They're busy gearing up, and they just got lucky and found a block to the game that just had been won. So yeah, I think that's it. And then like the boogeyman of Antpool, they're the largest producer of these empty blocks, right? So if you go to mempool.space, you'll see Antpool and their like constituents, as I call them now, because they're all using the same templates. And that specifically btc.com, pool in, brains, all kind of thrown to the bus for that one because it's 100%. I have an inkling Luxor's templates sometimes look very close to Antpool's, and they have been mining empty blocks lately. So just people don't trust verify, but keep their eye on Luxor and kind of the templates they're generating. But at the end of the day, the reason for empty blocks isn't the equipment, it's the pool operator's choice to do so.
Very interesting. Yeah.
In my own opinion.
And I really appreciate you explaining that. I appreciate you explaining, a rebuttal to the, to the Bitcoin mechanic tweet. And guys, look, that does it for today's clip. Portland, thank you so much for joining us. And
of course.
Where can the fellow plebs find you?
The plebs,
if they want to bug you,
they can find me somewhere. No, they can find me on Twitter at Portland Hodl. Blue laser eyes, keeping that until 100K.
Sweet.
And yeah, so
all right.
A lot of good Bitcoin education content, and Twitter Spaces is often where I'm kind of hanging out with the plebs, talking about Bitcoin and Bitcoin tech. So yeah, but closing all this out, again, like this is my experience in my measurements I've taken, right?
Yes.
I could be totally wrong. If Ampool comes out tomorrow and goes like, hey, we actually did fix this, which I don't think is going to happen, and I don't believe it actually fixed it. But with that said, I'll admit I'm wrong. But my objective testing I've done and all the wishy-washy like stories of basically ASIC boost aside, no, it's the pool's decision to mine an empty block at the tip that causes an empty block to happen. That is, the Antminer does not willingly just go, I'm going to mine an empty block. Foundry and Mara have not mined empty blocks, and that is a deliberate design decision that was made.
Very nice. Very nice. Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks again, Phil. Have a great day. Bye.
Peace.